Hey everyone, Dr. Liebreich here, and today I'm doing your video for week one. This is social problems. So let's get started. Typically, I always have an agenda to let you know what I'll be talking about in this week's lecture. So today will be introductions, lecture, exit pass, which I'll explain in greater detail later on in the video, and then we'll end with reminders. And I apologize. I know there's a lot of background noise. I don't have central AC where I'm at right now, so that's the AC. If you have any follow up questions about anything I say because of clarity, feel free to email me. All right, so let's start with introductions. I always like to say I will never ask my students to do anything I wouldn't do. And so I am introducing myself to you all the way I expect you to introduce yourself for the week one discussion board posts. That way you can sort of model what I've done, only typing it up for your discussion board posts. All right, so I'm from Central Ohio originally. In fact, I'm in Ohio right now, hence the no central air. I feel like that would not fly in South Carolina. As far as my education, I completed my bachelor degree at Ohio State University. Then I did my master's degree at West Virginia University. I fell in love with teaching there, so I decided to continue on with my PhD at the University of Hawaii, Manoa. And there I completed my PhD in 2020 during the pandemic, which eventually led me to my first faculty professor position at in South Carolina and then onward to CCU. And I've been here for 2 years, although I've been teaching for 10 years because I started teaching as a grad student. All right. I'm here to teach and learn from others. I view the teaching process as a back and forth reflexive process. So, in addition to doing these weekly lectures, my hope is that I will learn from you all by reading your weekly discussion board posts and your notes that you will be submitting based off of what you're reading from the textbook. I want to learn more about the college student experience. As you'll learn throughout this semester, part of studying social problems is examining what we refer to in sociology as social institutions. Well, higher education is one of those social institutions where we can study social problems. So I really want to learn from you all what your experiences are at college, at the university level, and how they relate to this topic of social problems. And then my fun fact this time is that you all are my very last class at CCU. I've accepted a position in the Chicago area, closer to my family in the Midwest. So I hope this is a really awesome semester and that I get to know you all better. All right. Again, like I mentioned on the last slide, your turn is coming. You'll be answering all of these questions on the discussion board forum, but I've modified them a little bit to make it make sense for students. So you'll see you're still going to say where you're from. For education, you can talk about high school, or if you're a transfer student, where you transferred from. Perhaps you can say what your major is, what year you are at CCU, and that sort of thing. Why you're here, one thing you want to learn, and one fun fact. All right, so let's start digging into content. We do have a condensed 4.5 week session, summer session 2 class. So we really got to start diving into content stuff. So for chapters 1 and 2 during our first week, we're really just thinking about what are social problems and sort of providing a foundation for everything we'll be learning throughout the semester. And so we can define social problems as an issue or thing that is a source of harm for some or all members of society. Usually social problems are associated with controversy and or negativity. And so you can see here from the pictures I pulled that some topics that tend to come to mind when we're discussing social problems, things like war or environmental pollution, political issues such as gender-based violence, sexual assault, things like that. And in fact, a lot of my research, including my dissertation work that I did for my PhD, focuses on gender-based violence. And so you'll see how I incorporate that into our textbook stuff and what we're learning in our class. throughout the semester. I will point out now, oftentimes, the content we study in social problems class can be really challenging. It's controversial. It can be triggering for some folks. So if you ever have that experience where you're listening to the weekly video and something brings up a triggering emotion for you, the syllabus has information in it regarding who to contact at CCU as far as mental health resources, counseling services, and things like that. So I just want to make sure you know that that stuff is available should you need it later on in the semester. All right. So sociologists have sort of come up with 8 official components of social problems that you can see here. So social problems result from the ways in which society operates. Social problems are not caused by bad people. So sometimes we want to point fingers at bad behaving people, but we really have to understand how these things are structural and how they always are just sort of going to exist within society because of structural issues. Problems are socially constructed as people define a condition as harmful and in need of change. This means when we say in sociology that something is socially constructed, what we mean is that we, as members of a society, collectively define something. In this case, we're defining conditions as harmful and in need of change as a social problem. But because they're socially constructed, they can evolve and change over time, or perhaps in different parts of the country or in different countries altogether. The way that members of a particular society define a social problem or what they deem as a social problem might change over time, again, geographically, things like that. However, essentially all societies have some form of social problems. So they're always going to exist within a society. They just change from different countries or over time. People see problems differently, even within the same society. I mean, think about what's happening right now with the upcoming presidential election. We see that our country is quite divided and polarized over a lot of controversial political issues that have been deemed social problems. And so while pretty much anyone living in the United States can define a social problem and name specific ones related to politics, that doesn't necessarily mean we, as members of the same country and the same society, are going to name the same social problems, right? Again, speaking to this idea of social constructs, definitions of problems change over time. Problems involve subjective values as well as objective facts. So if we think about environmental pollution, well, we can get climate scientists to state facts, scientific facts related to that, and that's objective fact. But there are also going to be subjective values that we as members of a society, as individuals, place onto those facts, onto this social problem issue of environmental pollution. And so that might be subjective or it might change depending on who we're talking to, what individuals we're talking to within our society. Many, but not all social problems can be solved. And even when we do say we have solved a social problem through policy or change in mentality within our society, oftentimes that solution proliferates into new, unforeseen social problems, unintended consequences. So we fix one thing, but that fix snowballs into other future social problems. And then finally, various social problems are related. So we can start to make connections, whether it's thinking about politics and policy and trying to solve multiple social problems, or we're going to learn about intersectionality and how race, class, gender, and other identity categories usually influence social problems and how they play out within social institutions because they're related, they're connected. All right. Now, we also got to talk about classic sociological theory. This probably won't come up so much in your textbook, but I want to do this because I know for all future upper division classes in our department, SOC 101 and our class, SOC 102, social problems, are prerequisites for upper division classes. And so in SOC 101, Intro to SOC, you get sort of this foundational classical sociological theory stuff. However, sometimes in social problems, it can be overlooked. So I want to make sure you have that foundation for future sociology classes because this is a prerequisite. So these three guys are considered the founding fathers of sociology. We have Weber, Marx, and Durkheim. They're actually pictured here as cartoons in that order: Weber, Marx, Durkheim. And I would say probably students, if they're familiar with any of these theorists, it's usually Karl Marx. So you may have heard of him in a high school history class or an econ class, something like that. All right. In terms of the field of sociology, Weber is most associated with his theory, symbolic interactionism, Marx with conflict theory, and then Durkheim with structural functionalism. And in fact, we see contemporary theories from the 1970s onward that continue to build upon these three classical theories. So with conflict theory and Marx's work, he was really concerned with class conflict and class inequities. However, starting in the 1970s, we saw gender theorists building upon his work and doing gender conflict theory. All right, but what is symbolic interactionism? So, in a nutshell, this is the idea that bureaucracy makes industrialized societies efficient, but it also dehumanizes experiences of members within that society. Conflict theory, again, very short and sweet, is the idea that we should be critical of inequalities between workers and owners of the means of production. In Karl Marx's case, folks who owned the factories during the height of industrialization. And then, of course, looking at the exploitation of workers. Finally, structural functionalism looks at how do large-scale industrialized urban societies hold together without the bonds of tradition. Now, here it's important to contextualize when these theorists were writing. They were writing during the height of the Industrial Revolution, during industrialization, when our society, as well as lots of other Western countries, were moving from agrarian societies to industrial societies. So farming, producing food for ourselves, to more urban spaces where we have factory workers. And so you can see how that heavily influenced the way they were theorizing society and the world around them. All right. I would say if you walk away at the end of the semester from SOC 102 and you don't remember anything else, I would really like you to remember this matrix. It will be front and center on a lot of assignments, including the midterm exam. So make sure you know this, even though it may not necessarily be quite as explicit in your textbook. Okay, so let's talk about more contemporary theory, social constructionism. This is thinking about how social things, including social problems, evolve over time and are different contextually. In other words, social problems are constructed based on the values and norms within society. Another really popular contemporary sociological theory that is really foundational to our field now, though, is the sociological imagination by C. Wright Mills. Essentially, he is theorizing that seeing how the social world connects to our everyday lives is really important. So we can think about individuals within our society and what we're experiencing on a daily basis, and then connecting those to sort of big picture, macro scale issues, if you will, things that are happening within social institutions. So we might not always think about how our daily experiences are connected to these sort of big picture social problems. But if we start to analyze these social problems as they relate to all of society within social institutions, we can make connections with what those things mean to our daily experiences, our lived experiences. And then finally, I touched on this a little bit when I was explaining feminist Marxist work and gender conflict theory. But feminist theory is thinking about social problems through the lens of gender. So if Karl Marx was thinking about exploitation in terms of class and socioeconomic status and workers, with gender, we can think about the exploitation of women who historically have been subordinate and marginalized when it comes to the gender binary. And we'll do a whole section on gender about maybe the halfway point in our semester. So stay tuned for more on that. All right. There are some other influential social institutions when it comes to social problems, politics and economics being two main ones. So, in terms of politics, often, but especially in the United States, an issue doesn't become a social problem until it's been politicized. So, until politicians start talking about it, maybe talking about ways to fix it through policy. This is often done when someone runs for public office and they need an issue or platform to run on. So something may have already existed for years and decades, but until it starts being popular in mainstream political discourse, oftentimes it's not viewed by the general overall population as a social problem. And then regarding economics, during recessions, elected officials will socially construct social problems to explain economic downturns to the masses. So we see people losing their jobs. If you think about the housing crisis in the early 2000s, circa 2008, when stuff like that happens, politicians often need to find a way to frame those economic issues within a social problems framework. All right. And then finally, within the field of sociology, we have to think about what it means to research pretty much any topic, but especially social problems, because oftentimes sociologists are particularly concerned with how do people aim to fix social problems? What kind of policies are being discussed? What are politicians saying? Especially because of the political framing required for us as members of a society to understand something as a social problem. And so as sociologists, we get good at identifying social problems, and many of us become public sociologists, and in that we want to work on bettering our community through collaboration and partnership. Oftentimes those collaborations and partnerships being with politicians and so elected officials, the mayor's office, city council, things like that. And that's what we refer to as public sociology. All right. Now, at the very beginning of the slides, I said I'm going to have you do an exit pass. If you haven't had me before, that might be a foreign concept. But I regularly ask students to provide me with anonymous feedback so that I can adjust our class based off of the needs of students. So as an example, I used to like to have students, especially in online classes, submit assignments at 11:59 a.m. so I could spend my afternoon and early evening grading. But I learned quickly through anonymous feedback that most students work and have internships during the summer. And so it was really hard for them to get stuff done before the end of business day. They asked for submissions to be due at 11:59 p.m. so that they could work on stuff after they were done with work. So now I do that for all my online classes. Everything's due at 11:59 p.m. I'm not going to grade things when they first get submitted. At the earliest, I will start grading the following morning, but that seems to work out well for students. So those are the types of adjustments I can make should you have any issues. Maybe you're really struggling with an assignment and you have a specific question about the rubric for that assignment. You can ask that in the exit pass. You can tell me how your semester's going, how your summer's going. I'll ask questions like that. It's really just a temperature check to see how everyone's doing. And so there will be a link each week on the PowerPoint slides. And if responses get low, I'll also send out a class-wide email to you all. But other than that, I should also say, if you have a very specific question about assignments, content, something like that, you may not always want to ask it in the exit pass. You may need me to know who you are so I can respond to you directly. In that situation, you can email me. We can either go back and forth via email, or we can also set up a time to meet in real time via Zoom. All right. So that's all I have for you. Make sure you read the first 2 chapters of our textbook, Complete Discussion Board 1. That individual response is due at 11:59 p.m. on Friday. And then you need to respond to at least one classmate by Sunday at 11:59 p.m. In all of my infinite wisdom and experience, I've learned that if both individual responses and peer responses are due on the same day, that's not enough time for people to respond to each other. And then you also need to submit your weekly reading notes by 11:59 p.m. on Friday. So this is exactly how it sounds. As you read the textbook, you'll take notes on definitions of key terms, theories, methodologies, things like that. Type them up however you would usually type up your notes. So they don't have to be paragraph style. They can be bullet pointed notes, color coded, however you want to take your notes, and you'll submit those. They'll also come in handy as you prepare for your midterm exam because you already have notes prepared. All right, everyone, that's all I got for you. Have a great week. I look forward to reading your work over the weekend.